Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, subscribe to it, rate it, share it with everyone you know. Be sure to check out the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates. There's always something new coming down the block. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their continued support. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or go to metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today. So let's get into today's episode of Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
Think about this. The first example of recorded music was released in 1898. 126 years later, you would think that just about everything's been done already, but it hasn't, not even close. And for as much music as I've listened to over the course of my lifetime, occasionally it's refreshing to hear something where I can honestly say, I've never heard anything like this. It's even more unusual when I can follow up that statement by saying, yeah, but I kind of like it too. Sometimes the most innovative music comes from those willing to dabble in extremes. And when those extremes come from legitimate emotional or philosophical sources, that's when you can say, I've never heard anything like this, I kind of like it, and damn it, I think this guy is serious. So that brings me to St Lenox. St Lenox is a musical project spearheaded by Andrew Choi and a revolving set of musicians who have created some of the most unique and original sounding indie pop music that you are going to find anywhere. Since 2015, Andrew Choi has released 5 full-length albums, each of which explores a different concentration of Andrew's various interests. His latest album, which was released in October 25th, is entitled 10 Modern American Work Songs. It's a record that easily falls into place with his previous releases, such as 2015's 10 Songs About Memory and Hope, 2016's 10 Hymns from My American Gothic, 10 Fables of Young Ambition and Passionate Love from 2018, and 2021's 10 Songs of Worship and Praise for Our Tumultuous Times. So what makes these records so unique and unusual? Well, it's Andrew himself. His lyrics aren't exactly held to standard lyrical rules. In fact, they read more like narratives. Other times, they sound like they could be part of somebody's master's thesis. Other times, they read like a blog post or stuff you'd find in your email inbox. The difference is that Andrew's powerful voice takes all these lyrics and squeezes every bit of emotion out of every word, taking the most detailed and mundane aspects of his life and treating it as if it were a matter of life or death and believing this sincerity every single time. It's amazing. Imagine Tom Waits grabbing your personal diary and setting it to music so that Nick Cave could make a record out of it. It's both weird and wonderful at the same time. The music is almost as eclectic as Andrew himself. Andrew is an award-winning Julliard-trained violinist. He was once a conductor of the World Youth Symphony Orchestra at the Interlochen Center of the Arts. He's a graduate of Princeton. He has a PhD in philosophy from Ohio State. He also has a law degree from NYU. And oh yeah, there's the thing with the music. Andrew Choi isn't just being unique for uniqueness' sake. This is music that contemplates, provides specifics, and leaves you guessing what he's going to come up with next. This is my conversation with Andrew Choi from St. Lenox on Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Nice to meet you, Mike.
Nice to meet you. I'm going to tell you, I have been doing interviews for 30 years, doing the podcast for about 4.5. I don't think I've ever heard anybody do quite what you do, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible.
Okay. I'm glad.
I was listening to some of the earlier tracks, listening on Spotify and going back to some of your earlier albums, and I literally sat there like mesmerized. I was gape mouthed. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's pouring out everything. This is amazing to me.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it. And by the way, I as I think musicians should do, I listened to some of your previous episodes, and I enjoyed some of your interviews.
Oh,
So,
good. Thank you. So let me ask you a few questions here, because I've really been trying to really figure out how I want to direct this here. But as a guy who was a classically trained musician, as a young kid, where the music of classical music can be so regimented and precise. How did the concept of St. Lenox even develop? Where did that germinate from?
Oh, I mean, I will say I think the classical music like background is there. It really just germinated from I went to a philosophy conference because I was getting my PhD in philosophy, and I had presented at a conference and was very nervous. It went fine, but I was so nervous, and I drove back sort of from Florida, which is where the conference was, through Georgia, and stopped in Atlanta, and there was a karaoke event that was going on there, and I was like, you know what? I think maybe this will help me with my nerves. So I started doing karaoke for a while, and then moved into jazz standards. But because jazz standards, I really got into those because the jazz singers, they actually have a lot of similarities in terms of like artistic, attention to detail that classical musicians do. And I think that was really, in terms of writing, I guess that was my gateway into sort of thinking about pop writing. But after doing jazz standards, I went to I started going to open mic because I couldn't find a jazz trio that wanted to perform with me. And really,
Well, their loss, isn't it?
yes, yes.
When I think about your background, you talk about how some of that classical training is still in there. I mean, but your training is pretty intense. You were part of the Juilliard Youth Program. You were at
Yeah.
Interlochen. You conducted the World Youth Symphony Orchestra. That's a remarkable experience. But what was it that made you want to branch out? Were you feeling like restricted by that experience, or were you just interested in other things?
Oh, I mean, the answer is going to be a lot more simple. I was a senior in high school, and I was going to college, and I really just kind of wanted a reset on my life. That was part of it. Part of it was also just I had become a little bit disillusioned with classical music. Because in the 90s, like if you read about it, in the papers back then, there were a lot of orchestras closing, and my opinion was that the classical music industry was really kind of pivoting towards emphasis on child prodigies.
Hmm.
I guess I was a prodigy of sorts, but also emphasis on having musicians that had a certain look, because that was like that was understandably they were like, this is the only way that we know how to kind of keep people listening, is by just promoting artists that have a certain look that we're looking for. And I got really kind of disillusioned from that, and I, for the most part, stopped doing music for, geez, 4 years in undergrad, and then probably another six, probably about 12 years. Stopped doing music altogether. It was still something that, I of course listened to music in between then, but I really stopped doing music. And it wasn't really until probably just before, in the year before I went to karaoke, I started just randomly singing to like R&B and other tunes on the radio as I was driving to work. Not even thinking about it as like a thing. This was also actually not that long after American Idol like started and became a thing. And so it was probably around that time I started singing to the radio, just as just for fun. And then I guess the transition from there to karaoke was pretty smooth.
I was going to say that the rules of karaoke probably not quite as cumbersome of the rules of classical music or jazz, but
Yeah, well, I will say, like, it definitely taught me how to have fun, and it was a different kind of experience because when I was the if I'm like concert master of an orchestra or a soloist, it's really sort of about me. And sort of being a concert master, it's I'm sitting up in the front and like giving instructions to the people behind me. It's a different kind of relationship. For karaoke, it is a lot more of a community. There are rules in karaoke. I have friends at my old karaoke hangouts where they had a song that was theirs, and if
okay.
that was theirs, you don't do their song, just out of respect, because you got to let them do their song. You can't have two of the same song in the same night. There's all kinds of rules there too.
You should have never have more than one Paradise by the Dashboard Lights in one night, ever.
Yeah, yes,
That's
yes,
that's
yes.
8 minutes of grueling vocal work there, and if you can't do it, you can't do it.
Yeah. Yes, no, I had a friend. His song was I can't remember the name, but it was Just Once, Just Once. I can't remember the name of the artist, but
Oh, I don't know if it's like a Jeffrey Osborne or something like that, or something
yeah.
around there. It's amazing though because when I think of classical music and like choral arrangements, it's so different than what you have turned your musical career into. And the thing that is just so unique about you is the lyrics that you provide. I mean, your lyrics follow like a detailed inventory of everything around you, everything you're feeling, everything you're noticing, everything that you're interested in. And what's amazing about it is that you're making every moment, every line of those lyrics seem like a life or death situation. That takes a remarkable amount of balls, and then it also takes a remarkable amount of vision too, because this is such an unusual approach to lyric writing and to songwriting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, well, I mean, I mean, like, look, I think lyric writing, I guess part of what I aim to do is like I do have, like maybe political or ethical goals that I have with my music writing, but I don't really want to write songs that kind of tell people directly, like this is what you should do, or these are good things or bad things that you're doing in your life. I think really the way to kind of motivate people is to kind of let them see things from my perspective.
Hmm.
And I think my goals as a writer are more to provide kind of like, for lack of a better word, like a cinematic experience. And if they can see things that are valuable to me, sort of from that perspective, then I think that that's a better way to move people than kind of lecturing them or having a course that tells people what to do.
You're certainly not the kind of performer where you seem to be you're jamming ideology down anyone's throat. It's really just a matter of observation. But like emotionally, when I hear you sing, it's like if Nick Cave suddenly came out of his shell, stop being so damn shy. Of karaoke, probably not quite as as cumbersome of the rules of classical music or jazz. But
Yeah, well, I will say like it definitely taught me how to have fun, and it was a different kind of experience because when I was the if I'm like concertmaster of an orchestra or a soloist, it's really sort of about me. And sort of being a concertmaster, it's I'm sitting up in the front and like giving instructions to the people behind me. It's a different kind of relationship. For karaoke, it is a lot more of a community. There are rules in karaoke. I have friends at my old karaoke hangouts where they had a song that was theirs, and if
okay.
that was theirs, you don't do their song just out of respect, because you got to let them do their song. You can't have two of the same song in the same night. There's all kinds of rules there too,
You
but
should
it is
never
more.
you should have never have more than one Paradise by the Dashboard Lights in one night ever.
Yeah, yes,
That's
yes,
that's
yes.
8 minutes of grueling vocal work there, and if you can't do it, you can't do it.
Yeah. Yes, no, I had a friend. His song was I can't remember the name, but it was Just Once, Just Once. I can't remember the name of the artist, but
Oh, I don't know if it's like a Jeffrey Osborne or something like that, or something
yeah.
around there. But it's amazing though because when I think of classical music and like choral arrangements, it's so different than what you have turned your musical career into. And the thing that is just so unique about you is the lyrics that you provide. I mean, your lyrics follow like a detailed inventory of everything around you, everything you're feeling, everything you're noticing, everything that you're interested in. And what's amazing about it is that you're making every moment, every line of those lyrics seem like a life or death situation. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
that takes a remarkable amount of balls, and then it also takes a remarkable amount of vision too, because this is such an unusual approach to lyric writing and to songwriting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, well, I mean, I mean, like, look, I think lyric writing, I guess part of what I aim to do is like I do have, like maybe political or ethical goals that I have with my music writing, but I don't really want to write songs that kind of tell people like just directly, like this is what you should do, or these are good things or bad things that you're doing in your life. I think really the way to kind of motivate people is to kind of let them see things from my perspective.
Hmm.
And I think my goals as a writer are more to provide kind of like, for lack of a better word, like a cinematic experience. And if they can see things that are valuable to me, sort of from that perspective, then I think that that's a better way to move people than kind of lecturing them or having a course that tells people what to do.
You're certainly not the kind of performer where you seem to be you're jamming like ideology down anyone's throat. It's really just a matter of observation. But like I said, you emotionally, when I hear you sing, it's like if Nick Cave suddenly came out of his shell, stop being so damn shy.
I'm flattered. I mean, I will say this. I think also that I think that there is a way of thinking about sort of people's everyday lives as being kind of boring and not really worth sort of exploring what's happening there. But people's everyday lives, and I think that a lot of what I try and write about is pretty ordinary stuff in that sense. People's everyday lives are of course incredibly moving, and people go through their day, sort of they'll cry about something significant that happened to them, but when you look at it from 30,000 feet, sort of it may seem insignificant. And I think part of what I want to do sort of in my writing is write about things that seem ordinary, but kind of giving them their full credit. Even though a lot of people's lives may seem boring, they don't go through their life as if, nothing's happening and they just stared at a wall all day. There's stuff that may seem boring to other people, but in actuality, it is very moving for them. And I think it's important to kind of see people's lives in that way.
Each of your albums has taken on like a different concentration, a different focus. It could be religion or relationships or youthful ambitions or death or whatever. It could be. It could be just you clearing out your emails. But the latest album, 10 Modern American Work Songs. Tell me about that concept and how you developed that one.
So I mean I would say in general I don't usually start out like before writing anything with a concept about what a record's going to be about. Like I just I'll go to open mic every week or every other week, and I'll just write about stuff that's happening in my life. And like I think what will happen is that I'll kind of look back through the catalog of songs that I haven't recorded or put down, and there will be themes that pop up. And I will say, like over the last 20 years, I went through like a period where, went to good schools, got my PhD in philosophy, was hoping to become a philosopher. But because of money and other life situations, I was worried that I would end up alone in a small town, sort of in the middle of nowhere. And as a gay man, there's a high chance pursuing a career like that, I would end up alone, and sort of transitioned over to something that I thought would be better and more lucrative, and sort of ended up doing the law. And I think when you have so many transitions in your life, that have to do with work, it's just going to happen that there can be themes that pop out of that. And I think there are a number of songs that are from that period. And I guess from that perspective, it's no surprise. Of course, I was going to write a record like this because that was a significant narrative way of sort of describing what happened in my life then.
Well, it's
Yeah.
it's interesting that you bring that up because I was listening to 10 Hymns from My American Gothic, and as you're studying law at the same time, you're singing songs about like Thurgood Marshall or Nixon, and they're really really interesting. The observations you have about them, and it again, it's not politically motivated. It's what are these people about, and here's what I'm seeing out of this, and it's interesting to hear you talk about how you put those conceptual narratives together. It doesn't sound like you're sitting there saying, okay, I want to do songs about ambition and passionate love. It's like these things are coming at different times, and you're pulling it all together at different moments. I mean, is that a way of looking at it, or
Yeah.
do you concentrate at some point and say these are going to be about American Gothic or
No,
religion or whatever it may be?
no. I mean, I think what you're saying is right. I mean, I will have like maybe 7 or 8 songs that will already have been written and just kind of pull a theme out of that. And and then at some point sort of I end up, writing a few more songs to kind of close out, the 10 songs from that point. And really, like, I think in some ways it's uh, I mean, at least for, I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong way to go about it, but I think for me it's a better way to go about it because, if I was to prescribe ahead of time, like, oh, this is what I'm going to write the record about, I think it takes away from. I really want listeners to approach it and interpret things for themselves out of what's happening in my life. And I don't want to be too prescriptive about that because my judgment about what happened in my life, that shouldn't necessarily be what somebody else's judgment is.
Right.
When they form a judgment about what happened in my life, it's got to be based on their reasons and their way of looking at things. It's not going to just be because Andy told me so. And I think not being too prescriptive ahead of time, I think is a good way to go about that.
It's also, I would imagine, a lot to ask to creatively try to come up with 10 songs about one topic all at once. Like it almost has to, like, I mean, people's minds just don't think that way. How can I spread this out into 10 different passages? But then to go back and then to kind of reconstruct, a
Mm.
larger narrative, I think that probably saves you a whole lot of aggravation.
Yeah. And like my memory's terrible. So if I was to try and do that like just on the fly, like it's not going to happen. There's going to be things that I forgot. And going back through and sort of putting the record together, there were a lot of things that I forgot, and I went back and sung the songs, and it was interesting and emotional. There's one song there about the house that I had in it was a very cheap townhouse that I had in Columbus, Ohio. I was a graduate student,
Hmm.
got the house for less than $30,000. Um, when the realtor showed us the house, we walked up the stairs to this. This isn't in the song. We walked up to the second floor, and there was a used condom on the stairs, and we exchanged glances, and we just kind of moved on. And was like, I'm gonna try and put this together myself. But thinking, that one song, I can't remember what it's called. It's the house I left for work in New York. Just thinking about that house, the reason it's on the record there is because ultimately, I loved that house because I put so much work into it. But I left it because I wanted to go to New York to
Yeah.
continue finding, work that would pay me. And I think that says something about the nature of work.
Now,
People can draw their own conclusions, but I think there's something there that may help guide them.
you did remove the condom, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It was it was on this like super, it was like 2 inch long brown shag carpet, just like everywhere. It was like leftover from the 70s. It was one of those bachelor pad townhouses. But yeah, no, I had to take down this mirror wallpaper. It was so, I don't know what people were thinking about that decade.
there's a number of songs in the new album that I've been able to listen to that are really really interesting. The first one, if I butchered the name, it's okay. The quasi Nicomachean ethics, drunk
Got it
uncle
right.
advice. Did I get it right?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank God for the internet. Um, but it's literally like a list of well-meaning advice that could only come from either a drunk uncle or a famous Greek philosopher. It's like one of the two. And I think there's a chance that you and I may have the same uncle. But but tell me about that song because I found it to be really entertaining because it is just a laundry list of very mundane, practical advice.
Yeah. Well, so I have a nephew actually who was in college. he started taking some philosophy classes. So when he would come back, from like holidays and whatnot, and the family's getting together, I would have conversations with him, oftentimes about philosophy, which he was taking. And of course, I had a significant background in philosophy. I was going to become a philosophy professor at some point, and so we were talking about that. But I put the reason it's called quasi Nicomachean Ethics is there's a book called Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, and purportedly Nicomachus was his son, and that was Aristotle's more. It was more of an informal book actually, but an informal book of kind of ethical guidance for his son as he went off into the world. Uh, this person is not my son; he's my nephew, and so I called it quasi Nicomachean Ethics, just as a list of some kind, not nearly as philosophical as Aristotle, but at the same time, people don't necessarily need philosophical advice. Like telling somebody to bring a bottle of wine with them to a party. That's just like people don't know that ahead of time, but it's great advice
It's just
to
good
people.
form. You never want to show
Yeah,
up
yeah,
empty-handed. Right.
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff there that is more meant in that, because he's actually he turned 21 already, but advice that I think would be useful to him. And it did get me thinking about, just the nature of advice, because there's as you're saying, there's like a spread of different kind of advice in there. But as I think about it, I'm like, really some of the practical advice, like the wine and just having like anecdotes for conversations at parties, things like that. That's actually maybe that's more useful, and maybe he doesn't need to hear about Aristotle's like aiming at the mean between two extreme. Maybe he doesn't need to hear about that. Maybe he needs this other advice.
But
Yeah.
maybe Aristotle was that drunk uncle.
Maybe.
I mean, it's been a while since he's been out carousing, but nevertheless.
Well, that the Nicomachean Ethics, that book is supposed to be quite a more formal for him. That's supposed to be his more informal advice, as opposed to, I'm sure he's got some other formal books on ethics, which I've never read.
One of the other the songs I thought was really interesting was Rudy, where you appear to be singing emails. But what's interesting about it is that you're reading emails with someone that you clearly respect and admire, and that it sounds like in some ways you're comparing his accomplishments to your own. Tell me a little bit
Mhm.
about that song, and are these is Rudy someone you email?
So, I do have a friend named Rudy. It's not about him. It's just the sometimes you pick a name because it works better in the song. I mean, I think for me, a lot of what that song is about, so a lot of the details are less directly sort of about my life, although there are many anecdotes in there. For instance, forgetting my mom's birthday. There are a lot of details there that are directly from my life, but a lot of the stories are also kind of just commenting direct on what I know to be a lot of people's lives. I myself changed professions several times in my life. And I think at each of those times, when you pick something as a profession, there are other paths that you didn't choose that you can kind of denigrate as a way of kind of building yourself up. Like, like, oh, I didn't do that. And what I'm doing, like it confirms, that I'm doing the right thing now.
Yeah.
So when I was a when I was a classical musician, I would never have performed pop music because I thought it was beneath me. And having made that judgment, so it probably made the transition to sort of doing what I'm doing now more difficult. And I think what I wanted to focus on there was just the ways in which we form judgments about other people, how that can end up putting us in a weird position where same with philosophy. When I was a philosophy PhD, I wanted to become a philosophy professor. I really despise people who went into the law, and now look, look where I am. So I think, in that song, the protagonist has kind of resents this other person for having chosen what he seems to think is a kind of less worthy way of arranging priorities, but nevertheless, he's stuck in a position where now he feels like maybe that's where things should go in his life. And now, now he's looking at his friend Rudy with a mix of I would say bitterness, but also envy. And that's just the strange position that a lot of us are in when we go into the world of work and try and find a way for
Yeah, but
ourselves.
we all kind of feel a certain amount of that. I mean, there's always going to be someone that you're going to admire, but then at the same breath you're saying, "Boy, I wish that were me rather than him." I think it's actually a
Yeah.
very human emotion to have envy, but also respect at the same time. I think they kind of
Yeah.
go really hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's, I don't know. I think it's something to kind of acknowledge, and very much, especially in the age of social media, something that is definitely a part of our culture. So I don't know. I thought it would be interesting to think about it in that way.
You've talked a number of times here today about these transitions in your life. You go to Princeton, you get the PhD at Ohio State, you get a law degree. Amidst all of this, you're talking about transitions that are pretty broad, and not just like there's a lateral move between being a philosopher and you know corporate attorney. I mean, that's a big substantial leap. That's not something that would necessarily think, well, I mean, I've learned all about ethics, now I'm going to go into the law. That's it's kind of like a total 360 for most people.
You know, I would say, I don't know how the evidence bears out, if someone were to do a study. I think that's what work life is like for many millennials and sort of younger Gen X. I think that's what it's like for a lot of people. Like the reason why I had so many significant changes in my life had to do with like large factors going on in the world that I really had nothing to do with.
Hmm.
For classical music, that it was really, part of it was just the classical music industry caving. um as I went into I went into philosophy in part because I couldn't think of what else to do with my life. But after sort of doing philosophy, it was towards the end of my career, sort of before I got my PhD, that the market for teaching jobs in the
Hmm.
humanities really cratered. And that's something where it's not like I sort of chose something completely new to do with my life. There was really no path further for me to do philosophy in a way that was compatible with my romantic goals, and to some extent artistic goals. It was really the industry that and the economy and things going on in the United States that really pushed me sort of into this other direction. And I think maybe that's something that I didn't even think about it, but now looking at the record, maybe that's something that the record is providing some kind of commentary on as well. Because I definitely didn't. I wouldn't have decided, oh, I'm going to make complete career change just on a larf, right?
I mean, I can't imagine that apart from education, like, the job prospects for philosophy were all that great to begin with. I mean, there's not a lot of job openings for philosophers, but I mean, you are right. I mean, people don't necessarily, the path they follow isn't necessarily the path they intend, early on, and you do, transition multiple times. I mean, everyone does that, and it's interesting that you've been able to apply that to like an artistic endeavor, like the music of St. Lenox. You've done it in a very fascinating and unique way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I will say that I haven't really planned out sort of, up until this point. I never really planned out like what my music career would be like, but it was just a matter of going to open mics and just writing about sort of what's going on in my life. I think I've been lucky in that, of course, I had like a significant musical background that helped to give me a lot of tools to be able to write about the things that I want to write about. And I probably learned a lot about writing when I was a PhD in philosophy and in my undergrad that I had never really applied it before I started going to open mics then. But I guess I've been lucky to sort of have that background to let me write about sort of what's going on in my life in a way that I hope people find compelling.
One of the things that I did want to ask you about, and I heard some other interviews that you had done about the last album, 10 Songs of Worship and Praise for Our Tumultuous Times. And I thought it was really interesting to hear you talk about it because the way the album comes off is that, it's a really interesting look of the value that you've experienced, not just with your own faith, but also observing the faith of others. And it's done in a very non-judgmental way. And in these times, we see nothing but judgment when it comes to faith and how people, express their religious beliefs. It's very interesting to hear you sing about these things, like in the song Bethesda, or Arthur is at a Shiva. I mean, they're both very respectful songs, but acknowledging the differences that we all have in our faith. Tell me about that, because I really thought that was a very, very novel approach that you never hear people do that anymore.
Well, I mean, I think that there definitely is, there definitely are records that people have written about, people in my situation where they have kind of moved a bit away from the church and are kind of evaluating things. And I definitely don't think it's bad music, but there is a history of sort of records where people talk in a way that kind of denigrates sort of their experience with religion. And I think that there is something very true about that as well. I guess I wanted to take a different approach, partly because I wanted to write something that I thought was inspired by my experience with religion, which my experience originally had been something that was very hopeful.
Hmm.
And like in I think the one thought that I was thinking about as I was writing the record was, so there's this concept of the good news in Christianity, and I think that concept about sort of it being very hopeful, that really kind of drove home what I wanted to try and communicate in a record. Not a judgment about, certainly legitimate things to be judgmental about, but I wanted to write about religion in a way that kind of, I want to motivate people.
Yeah.
Again, sort of like we were talking about with the last record. I want to motivate people, but not by telling people what to think. But if I can sort of point them to significant sources of value and have them see the value of that, that can maybe move them in maybe more productive ways, than than judgment. And at the same time, I think judgment is also something that I associate with kind of the negative qualities of the church. And I think maybe that was another reason why I wanted to try and move away from that. But um yeah, I don't know. I think it's really important to think about sort of hope and sort of trying to point to things that you see as valuable and getting other people to see that as valuable as well, as a better way of moving people, and trying to build kind of a songwriting technique around that idea. It's something that I'm working on and
Yeah.
still exploring.
With a philosophical background, you're talking about the value of faith. I mean, you could talk about faith forever and not really have a true understanding of what it is and what it isn't. And to have you approach it in that way was in a way kind of refreshing, because most music, most culture now denigrates faith and religion, and looks things from more of a scientific point of view rather than maybe a more philosophical perspective. And I think that was really what captured me about that record, is like, you're not proselytizing, you're not professing anything. These are observations. This is how you see the value in it without judgment.
Well, thank you. I mean, I will say, I guess part of my audience for that record was also people who sort of consider themselves, staunch Christians. I remember when I was when I was younger and going to like the they had like a youth Christian groups and whatnot. What I remember a lot from that experience was that a lot of people who have faith, that they find themselves in times where they kind of like need their batteries recharged, and they're looking for something that is provides them with some kind of inspiration. And I think for a lot of people in that situation, talking to them in a judgmental way doesn't really help. What they're looking for is inspiration. And maybe what I was trying to do with that record was providing them with an alternative way of being inspired by something. And I hope that it's something that I've done there. There's songs like the sort of my song about, I can't remember the names of my own songs, but what is it like to have children? I really wanted to provide people with like a vision of like a gay family, or a hopefully to be soon gay family, and sort of thinking about it like in the context of religion as being something that they can see as good. And I don't know, I think it's a different way of thinking about things, and I want to keep exploring it.
The way you create a narrative in your music is really is very, very unique. I can't think of anyone else in the world that does it like you have. And obviously your background has lent itself for you to be able to do that. But even when you talk about, religion, when people question their faith, I think it's necessary to strengthen your faith is just occasionally have it tested and say, well, here's what I believe in spite of all the things that are facing me. And I think that's what I think what that's part of the value of that record is because, okay, well, these are the things that I can agree with without feeling like someone is saying how wrong I am about things. And it's really remarkable how you've done that.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
The name of the new record is 10 Modern American Work Songs. Sandro, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you best of luck. It's an amazing body of work so far.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
The name of the new St. Lenox album is called 10 Modern American Work Songs. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.